Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Bhajana Randana. Yashodanandana Bhajana Randana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Just sing, sit a little farther over here. You're okay. Jaya Mishnapad Paramahansa Pradikacharya Justa Tirtha Shri Srimad Divine Grace Shilesi Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Pradikacharya Justa Tirtha Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavindra Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta-vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this 22nd day of September 2021 in San Diego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. We are in chapter 15, entitled The Yoga of the Supreme Person. We're reading text number 6 on page 597. Okay. Natad Basiyate Suryo Nashashanko Napavakaha Yadgadva Nanavartante Tadhama Padamang Mama. Okay, before Governor, you have to lower this. It's a brown one. Natadbasiyate suryo Nachashanko napavakaha Yadgadvan nanavartante Tadhama padamang mama. Natadbasiyate suryo Nachashanko napavakaha Yadgadvana vartante Tadhama padamang mama. Natadbasiyate suryo na shashanko na pavakaha yadgadvanana bhartante taddama padamang mama. Kundi Bihar, you want to try it? Natadambasiyate suryo na shashanko na pavakaha nagyadvanana bhartante pamamang mama. Govardhan. Natadbasiyate suryo na shashanko na pavakaha yadgadvanana bhartante taddama padamang mama. Ravi. Natadbasiyate suryo na shashanko na pavakaha yadgadvanana bhartante. Dami, you want to try? Natadbasiyate suryo na shashanko na pavakaha yadgadvanana bhartante taddama padamang mama. Michelle? Natadbasiyate suryo na shashanko na pavakaha yadgadvanana bhartante taddama padamang mama. Okay, I'll read the word by words.
Natadbasayate suryo
Natadbasiyate suryo
na shashanko na pavakaha
na shashanko na pavakaha
yagatva na nivartante
yadgadvanana bhartante
tadama paramam mama.
taddama paramang mama. No, not that. Basiyate, no. Illuminates suryaha, the sun. Na, nor shashankaha, the moon. Na, nor pavakaha, fire, electricity. Yat, where. Gatva, going. Na, never. Nivartante, they come back. Tat dhamma, that abode. Paramam, supreme. Mama, my. That supreme abode of mine is not illumined by the sun or moon, nor by fire or electricity. Those who reach it never return to this material world. Purport. The spiritual world, the abode of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, which is known as Krsnaloka or Goloka Vrndavana, is described here. In the spiritual sky, there is no need of sunshine, moonshine, fire, or electricity, because all the planets are self-luminous. We have only one planet in this universe, the sun, which is self-luminous, but all the planets in the spiritual sky are self-luminous. The shining effulgence of all those planets, called Vaikunthas, constitutes the shining sky known as the brahma-jyoti. Actually, the effulgence is emanating from the planet of Krishna, Goloka Vrndavana. Part of that shining effulgence is covered by the Mahatattva, the material world. Other than this, the major portion of that shining sky is full of spiritual planets, which are called Vaikunthas, chief of which is Goloka Vrndavana. As long as a living entity is in this dark material world, he is in conditional life. But as soon as he reaches the spiritual sky by cutting through the false, perverted tree of this material world, he becomes liberated. Then there is no chance of his coming back here. In his conditional life, the living entity considers himself to be the lord of this material world. But in but in his liberated state, he enters into the spiritual kingdom and becomes an associate of the Supreme Lord. There he enjoys eternal bliss, eternal life, and full knowledge. One should be captivated by this information. He should desire to transfer himself to that eternal world and extricate himself from this false reflection of reality. For one who is too much attached to this material world, it is very difficult to cut that attachment. But if he takes to Krishna consciousness, there is a chance of gradually becoming detached. One has to associate himself with devotees, those who are in Krishna consciousness. One should search out a society dedicated to Krishna consciousness and learn how to discharge devotional service. In this way, he can cut off his attachment to the material world. One cannot become detached from the attraction of the material world simply by dressing himself in saffron cloth. He must become attached to the devotional service of the Lord. Therefore, one should take it very seriously that devotional service, as described in the 12th chapter, is the only way to get out of this false representation of the real tree. In chapter 14, the contamination of all kinds of processes by material nature is described. Only devotional service is described as purely transcendental. The words paramam mama are very important here. Actually, every nook and corner is the property of the Supreme Lord, but the spiritual world is paramam, full of 6 opulences. The Katha Upanishad 2.2.15 also confirms that in the spiritual world there is no need of sunshine, moonshine, or stars. Natatra suryo bhati nachandra tarakam. For the whole spiritual sky is illuminated by the internal potency of the Supreme Lord. That supreme abode can be achieved only by surrender and by no other means. Om jnana timarandasya jnanandana shalakaya chakshu unmilitam mena tasmai shri gurave namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisances unto him and all members of Sri Parampara. So here we have a little glimpse of the description of the spiritual world. Krishna has described this material world, is given a very graphic analogy, as a reverse or upside down banyan tree. Anyone who knows a banyan tree, it can grow and grow and grow in an amazing way and become almost like a little forest. So this banyan tree of the material world is very entangling. It's described that it's made of the object of the senses and the 3 modes of nature and all different varieties of places and experiences that we can have in this world. And what the main function of that is that we completely forget the spiritual world. A reflection is by nature dependent on the original. And so anything that we have here must be there in the spiritual world in its reality. The whole Bhagavad Gita keys on this point that nothing happens here without intelligence behind it. It's almost an obvious point. If you look at any part of this world, even a blank wall, you think, well, it's made of various materials that were put together by intelligent people. It was painted in a certain way using intelligence. What to speak of the most obvious thing, which is our own bodies. So complicated, so fragile, really. But it's like an incredible machine that's working for so many years. You feed it and you take care of it and you do the thing, you breathe in and out and all the different things, and it continues functioning. But after a certain point it breaks down into its constituents, and then what happens? This is what the scientists don't know, is that you don't die. The body dies, but you don't die. This is the first lesson of the Bhagavad Gita. You're not the body. You're an eternal spirit soul. You are the consciousness within the body. And that consciousness has had so many other different apartments. This is just like an apartment that you enter into and eventually you get evicted from. You don't die. Jayate mrite vakadachan. Now that, understanding that truth changes every calculation we have about what's important in life. Because what we're doing now, according to the science of the Bhagavad Gita, is we're creating our future, our destiny. Even on a small scale, everybody knows, every parent knows the kid has to get educated. Otherwise, the future is very dark. So they're planning for something that's not so obvious at first. But there will be a future, and in the future you need certain facilities in order to prosper in this world. So what about the most important future that we have, which is what body we're going to operate or going to occupy when we leave this one? Now, it's also, we had so many bodies in previous. That's the law of karma and transmigration. This explains so much. Nothing is accidental. We're born in a certain family, we have a certain facility, certain intelligence, everything is there because of previous activities that we performed. And what we're doing now will determine our future. And for most people, that's a material future. We learned in the previous chapter about the modes of nature. If we're very mean-spirited, we're conducted by lower modes of passion and ignorance, means very selfish and only trying to look out for ourselves, then we're planning a very dark future for ourselves. We can easily lose this human form of life. It's not certain. It's a great gift, actually, because only in the human form can we understand this higher philosophy and guide our actions in such a way that we don't have to take birth again. This is a central feature of aspiration for everyone in the Vedic culture who's familiar with any of this philosophy, is to try to escape from the bonds of birth, death, old age, and disease, and all the other miseries that are here. Yes, there are certain pleasures that can be had, but when you think about them, they're very evanescent, means temporary. They easily evaporate by the force of time. Anyone who's lived for a little while in this world knows that you can't hold on to it. Any relationship you have with people, with money, with prestige, with this very body, it's all very temporary. So we're enjoined by the Shastra to search out that which is eternal. This first of the sutras. A sutra is a little aphorism. There's a book called the Vedanta Sutra. Veda means knowledge. Anta means supreme, or the end of all knowledge. So these aphorisms comprise the essence of all the Vedic knowledge, this wisdom of who we are, where we came from, what everything means, how we can work in this world and act for our ultimate best interest. And the very first sutra, very first aphorism, enjoins us to inquire into these things, not to simply be concerned with material gain and loss and pleasure and pain. So it says, atato brahma-jyoti. They're very concise, so you need some explanation. So ata means now, therefore. Brahma means spirit, or the absolute truth, the source of everything. Jigyasa, inquire, be inquisitive. And the very next sutra defines what that is. Janmadyasya yataha, that from which everything has come, and that which maintains everything, and ultimately that into which everything is absorbed when the annihilation takes place millions of years from now. So that's the Bhakti Vedanta is the name of our founder Acharya. His beautiful murti that's sitting there, statue, Srila Prabhupada. His very name encompasses so much truth. Bhakti Vedanta. The end of all knowledge culminates in bhakti. Bhakti means a loving relationship with God. That's the ultimate truth. And that's within every one of us. We've just forgotten it. We've forgotten it. Instead of trying to love God, we're trying to love and enjoy things in this material world. And tragically, that leads to bondage, and it leads to misery, sufferings of all kind. So the science of bhakti, now here in this chapter, as I mentioned, there's this wonderful analogy of the banyan tree. And we learn in text number 3, we have to cut out, we can't escape from this tree by going from one branch to another. We have to cut off the very root. And that root is sangha, is attachment. So with the sword of detachment, we have to cut off the root of that tree so that we can break free and go back to the spiritual world. And after doing that, we have to search out this absolute truth from which everything came, and then chajam purusham papadye, surrender unto the absolute, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And what are the advantages? Well, this is just a hint. Well, then he gives the verse about how to surrender. Nirmana moha jita sangha dosha. We have to give up our false pride that we can really find out these things on our own. We need help from someone who's enlightened, from someone who's beyond the coverings of ignorance that we're suffering. And so so give up the illusion of false pride and take the knowledge from the sources of wisdom. And jita sangha dosha, to conquer over the fault of so much material attachment. And that's possible through the cultivation of bhakti to Krishna, centering on the chanting of the holy name. the Hare Krishna mantra. Adhyatma nitya vinavritta kama, to be give up involvement in all kinds of sense pleasures, which simply bind us here, and be free of the dualities, heat and cold, pleasure and pain, sukha dukkha samgaya, known as happiness and distress. And such an underbelieved soul can go to this avyayam padam, this place, this spiritual world that he just describes in brief in the next verse. Now I wanted to share with you a little more detailed description of the ultimate goal that we're after, which is called Goloka Vrndavana. Another book that most of the devotees know, they all have heard of it, if not read it all, called the Brahma Samhita. Samhita means a song that's composed by Brahma, who's like the engineer of this universe. He lives for a very long time, and he's not eternal, he's not in a spiritual body, but he's very advanced, and he's a repository of a lot of this Vedic wisdom. And so he wrote this Samhita, a song, known as the Govindam prayers. And at the end is a beautiful description, a more detailed description of the spiritual world. We just got a little inkling here. So forgive me, it's going to be a good 45 seconds of Sanskrit, and then I'll explain what it means. Shriya Kanta Kanta Paramapurusha Kalpadaravo Dhruma Bhumischindamana Mahito Himamatam Kataganam Natyam Gamanam Api Vangshi Piyasaki Chadanandam Jyoti Padamapitadasvajam Apiya Sayatra Kshirabdi Sravati Sudhabim Justice Sumahan Nameshadhakyova Vachati Nihiyatrapi Samayak Bhaje Shwetan Vipam Tamaham Hagoloka Matiham Vedantaste Santa Chidivadachara Katipaye. So what he says there is that in this spiritual world, Goloka Vrndavana, which Srila Prabhupada mentions in this purport, there are unlimited goddesses of fortune, and Krishna is the lover of all of them. Shriya Kanta Kanta Padama Purushak, the Supreme Person, Krishna Govinda. Kalpatadavo Dhruma, the trees are not ordinary trees. They're known as desire trees. They're all conscious. They're not covered like trees here. And you can get whatever fruit you're looking for to offer to Krishna in any season. Here we have this wonderful fig tree that grows out here. It's almost, I think, finished with the figs now, right? But Dmitri Prabhu climbed up when it was just in bloom, and he got the sweetest figs I've tasted in my life. And this fig tree grows right here on the property. And those figs were offered to Krishna, and we honored it as prasadam. But you can imagine and say, okay, now we want about 30 mangoes to offer to Krishna. Bzzz, and then all the mangoes come. That's what's happening in the spiritual world. This Kalpatadava literally means desire trees. So Kalpatadava, Dhruma Bhumis, the land is made of these gems, Chintamani gems, not just ordinary earth. Chintamani, Toyam Amritam, the water is all nectar, walking is dancing, talking is all singing, and one can always hear Krishna's flute, dear flute playing in the distance. And everything is glowing with Chidananda. Chidananda is spiritual, blissful energy. Nothing is just dead matter there. And then it says something very interesting, that first of all he mentions the cows. There's many cows. And if you couldn't not point it at that direction. Yeah, if you want you can point it at me. But there's so many cows, Sayatra Kshirabdi, and they're all so blissful. I mean, we don't get this experience here, but in New Vrindavan we had some experience. Cows who are very blissful. They know they're not going to be slaughtered. They give much more milk and much sweeter milk, richer milk, because they're emotional beings, you know. And so there in the spiritual world, the cows are so blissful that the milk is leaking and pouring onto the ground, creating muddy pastures. They're so happy there. Shirabdi literally means an ocean of milk. And then here's a very interesting point. Not a second passes away there. There's no past, there's no future. There's just everything is present. You don't get old. And every day it's always a new variety of things that are going on in relations with God, with Krishna. But it's time doesn't exist. And only a few learned souls in this world are acquainted with that that world by realization. So that's just one of the many descriptions that you can find in the literature of this branch of Vaishnavism. Vaishnavism means worshipping Vishnu or Krishna. And Krishna gives a little hint of it here. But that's the place where we all came from. This is the whole idea, is that we're exiles here. We're in an unnatural situation. And because we're part and parcel of Krishna, we are bliss-seeking beings. But we're looking for it in the matter, and we're frustrated because we're spirit. And so that temporariness, that temporality of the pleasure here is very frustrating. Because in the spiritual world, everything is blissful and it's ever increasing. So it sounds like pie in the sky, but that's actually reality. And this material world is like a dream world. We're always trying to find that place of happiness and peace, but where can there be peace? We're in the middle of a pandemic, you know? Everyone's trying to forget it, but you can't forget it. It's always threatening you, and then, you know, there's somebody wearing a mask, and, you know, there's, oh my God, you know, my cousin had it, you know, and it's threatening. And that's just one thing. It's, you know, old age and disease and death is coming to everybody. Doesn't matter, rich or poor, man or woman. So Krishna is saying that's not the only reality there is. There is this whole other reality in my home. And he's welcoming us back. We all have a personal relationship with Krishna. So this is what bhakti means. It means rediscovering what we've forgotten for millions and millions of years. Our godly nature and our relationship with God. And beginning to act in that relationship and reviving our natural spiritual tendencies. And one of the first installments is a reduction in anxiety and fear. There's so much of that today because no one knows what's going to happen. All of the verities seem to be collapsing. You know, the security, whatever kind of security you thought you had, is not so certain now. And especially in young people, you know, I've read an incredible statistic, at least a majority, I didn't know, it was more than 50%, are in great pessimism about the future, mostly about climate change. They don't see us, the elders, doing much about it. And it's just getting worse and worse, and you can see it. The fires are burning, the floods are going here, you know, and pollution everywhere. So, but Krishna consciousness, you're not placing your faith or your hope in this plane of existence. You're establishing a different plane of existence. And yes, we're all going to die at one time, but if you can get free of this mortal coil and never come back and reattain your original spiritual body, what's not to like? And the wonderful thing about it is, whatever you do on this lifetime in regard to this, you may not perfect the whole process. You never lose it. You could, in your next life, you're in a situation where you can continue. Whereas if you make a lot of money, you got a lot of prestige, and whatever it is that you may want to get here, it's all taken away at the time of death. And who knows where you're going? Because not generally, if you're going to be materially successful in this world, you're going to commit a lot of sin. You may very well lose this human form. So it's a great investment. Let's put it that way. Investing first of all, your time in understanding the science of this, and then starting the process of taking it up, which is very easy. There's no prerequisite. You don't have to be born in a Brahmin family. You don't have to be Indian. You don't have to even be vegetarian. You just start chanting Hare Krishna, then gradually you'll learn more, and you can progress nicely. So that's my little take on this particular verse, text 6, where Krishna is inviting us back to this eternal world. And now he's going to describe a little more about it. The next verse is very important. Okay, any questions? Danavari, you have anything?
Hare Krishna.
Danavari, you have anything? Any questions?
No, Prabhu, Hare Krishna.
Okay,
no,
I'm sorry.
You.
Yeah, we have a big crowd tonight. I wanted to proceed, and we had finished with the chanting. But I promised tomorrow. Is it tomorrow? No. Next Monday.
I have a question.
Not yet. We have a local. I'll call on you.
Yes, I can wait.
Thank you. It's just a quick question. Do we have to offer food in the spiritual world? Do we have to offer it to Krishna?
You don't have to, but you really want to.
I really want to.
There's no have to up there. Have to is for down here. Said, well, I don't want to do it, but I'll do it because I know it's good for me. No, there you're spontaneously attracted to do things in relation to loving Krishna. So yes, it's great. You can pick the fresh figs, or you can do mangoes or papayas or whatever you're inspired to offer to Krishna.
Might as well just share it with Krishna and eat it together.
I'm sorry?
Might as well share it with Krishna and eat it together.
Yes. There's a picnic every day. You read about the cowherd boys. Every day they have a picnic with Krishna. They're just cavorting different games. It's what we always wanted to do, but we always had to stop doing that and doing something else in this material world to try to get on. Okay, you're on, Vijay.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, thank you very much. The quote from the purport is, quote, "One cannot become detached from the attraction of the material world simply by dressing himself in saffron cloth. He must become attached to the devotional service of the Lord." End quote. So my question is it possible for me to become attached to the devotional service of the Lord while wearing a different color other than saffron cloth?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think there's any pictures of Bhaktivinoda Thakur wearing saffron cloth. He was like practically the foundation of this whole movement. He revived this Gaudiya Vaishnavism in the 19th century and made it possible for his son to expand it and Srila Prabhupada to expand it all over the world. No, the saffron cloth and other aspects of renunciation, they help, but they're not necessary. They're not absolutely essential. What is essential is the following of the principles of devotional service. Yesterday we were talking about, because the whole thing was about surrender, text 5, very key verse. So there are these 6 principles of surrender. Anukulyasya sankalpa, pratikulyasya bharjanam. Rakshisyatiti vishvaso, goptadveva nanang tatatmanakshepta karpane shadbadha sharanagati. Sharanagati means the process of taking shelter of Krishna, of surrendering. So the first one is accepting those things favorable. Now it's interesting, it's not the first one was giving up those things unfavorable. That's the second one. But it's a very positive process. That's why Lord Chaitanya's movement, his process is so all-encompassing. Jagai Madhai didn't have to first become very moral and give up all of their sins and then they could surrender. They were contaminated, they were very sinful. But they got the mercy of Lord Nityananda, Lord Chaitanya's close associate, and they got the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. And yes, they gave everything up, but it was an instantaneous process. It was exceptional. But the same power is there for us also. Krishna means all attractive. That's the meaning of the word Krishna. And one of the the chief meanings in Sanskrit. And if we simply turn our attention to Krishna, especially through the chanting of the holy name, which is especially efficacious in this age, we'll begin our process of become attached to Krishna and simultaneously detached from Maya. And anyone who's seriously chanting or who has seriously chanted can directly testify that. It happened for me. I was pretty ordinary. I was lucky to be practicing some yoga and so forth. But I had so many attachments. But I started chanting Hare Krishna, visiting the temple, and that, and a big attachment became prasadam. Prasadam, I wasn't, it tasted delicious. I knew it was spiritual. And it had its desired effect. It kept me coming back to the temple, where I could take association. So it's a scientific process, but yes, it does require determination and enthusiasm and patience, as we learn in the Upadeshamrita. But when you keep the goal in mind, just like I remember the civil rights movement, I'm old enough to remember that in the 60s, and I forget the chant it was, but keep your eyes on the prize, and keep marching and doing it. In other words, don't forget the goal, and then the austerities toward the goal make sense, and you're able to do it. Again, the material analogy. Someone who wants to become an Olympic champion, they just had the Olympics, So much austerity, mental, physical, in order to do it. Oh, you got that prize, the gold medal, and all the honor and all of it. And you keep, many people don't obviously succeed in doing that, but the process is always the same. It means working, and doing it in such a way under the trainer so you don't, pull a muscle or whatever, There's also the do's and don'ts, eating the right way, because and a few lucky souls are able to get the. But in Krishna consciousness, we're all lucky souls. It just, I mean, there's no prerequisite except being sane and sober, and willingness to take up the process sincerely. So these are accoutrements. They help. The saffron cloth helps to remind you of renunciation, and it's more than just the cloth. Loose fitting cloth, tight clothes keep you in the bodily concept of life. The loose fitting, the simple. How much does it really cost? Practically nothing, and keep it clean, and that's it. You lose all of that involvement with trying to stay with the latest fashion. So much expense involved. It's crazy. So that in that sense it helps. So it's not essential, but it can help. All of these things can help. That's the idea. Short answer. Okay.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Haribol, Haribol. Michelle. Okay, wait. We need a mic over here.
Hare Krishna, thank you. I just learned the other day that Lord Chaitanya is in Goloka. That was my question last Sunday, where is he? But now my question is, my understanding is that, once we're with Krishna in Goloka, we're in a kind of illusion that, we don't know that he is necessarily God, but we want to worship him. Is that correct? And then the second part is, so if we're in that illusion, do we ever get to hang out with Lord Chaitanya?
Everything is based on desire. Just as we learn that this whole banyan tree is based on desire. Our desire to try to enjoy separately from Krishna is what brought us here and what keeps us here. So the great merciful souls who are enlightened, they give us another framework for desire, that you can turn your desire toward serving Krishna and everything spiritual. So those devotees who are so much enamored of chanting and dancing and worshiping Lord Chaitanya directly, he's Krishna. He's So there's a corner there where you can do that. When you read the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's a completely fulfilling experience. All the mellows are there, especially Kanjal mellow. So that's available. And the other point you made, I forget. You're referring to what is known as Yoga Maya. In this world, it's Mahamaya, where we not even believe in God, But in the spiritual world, you're beyond that. God generally is this awe and reverence thing, and as Prabhupada would say, conspicuous by its absence in Goloka Vrndavana. Goloka Vrndavana is meant for the more intimate rasas with Krishna. There's some servanthood there, but it's within the realm of Sakya-ras generally. The friends who serve him, but those who consider themselves equal to Krishna and want to play with him, Prabhupada says they'll think, what sort of a big man are you? I jump on his back. Sometimes he loses the wrestling match. He wants to lose because So it's a different mood there. What to speak of parental ras? Mother Yashoda does not want to think of Krishna as God. When she thought of Krishna as God, he quickly covered her with Yoga Maya, because that mellow, that wonderful mellow of parental love, maternal love, Krishna, loves to experience that. So it's a yes, we're in illusion, but it's a voluntary illusion, so that we can so that Krishna can enjoy these higher rasas. So that's what's going on there. It's kind of hard to think about it because we're so unfamiliar with it, we've forgotten it. But it's all based on what's most pleasing to Krishna, and that when we can participate in that, that's most pleasing to us. And the closest example we have is a mother and child in this world. The mother is completely focused on the health and welfare of the child, and if the child is comfortable, and if she smiles with that little toothless smile, the mother is in seventh heaven. Oh, that the child is doing okay, So that complete selfless love, where you're taking pleasure in the pleasure of the other, That's what's the essence of what bhakti is. Because we're part and parcel of God. So we're also full of ananda. This one of these sutras in Vedanta Sutra, Anandamaya Bhyasat. Anandamaya means full of bliss all the time. It makes sense. Why would God be unhappy at any time if he's all powerful? You know, if you were God, wouldn't you want to be happy? Of course, but we can't because we're not. So he's full of ananda, and we are also in our original form. Because we're minute, we can be covered over by a material body which is subject to all of these diseases and blows and old age and death. It's not our natural home. It's an incompatible situation. But when we engage in the process of giving Krishna pleasure, that's our natural state, and that's when we really begin to feel real spiritual pleasure. And we find the great acharyas like our six Goswamis, these are the original disciples of Lord Chaitanya, that they were living at the highest peak of renunciation. They had no homes of their own. They wandered around under a different tree in Vrindavan. They picked up rejected cloth, and they hardly ate and hardly slept. So what's left is that there's not much left in terms of material comfort. But they were the wealthiest in the world. They were experiencing at every moment the highest intensity of pleasure and love of Krishna and the Gopi Bhava. And they were writing wonderful, wonderful books, some of which we've been given. Srila Prabhupada gave us the Nectar of Devotion, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Nectar of Instruction, Chaitanya Charitamrita. So we have a conduit, we have a channel where we can perceive these things. But as long as our absorption is in matter, we won't feel it's interesting. But it's actually the greatest benefit to hear these things and to read them and learn them and live them. Okay, should I go on? It's a very important verse. We have time to cover it. Text number 7. Okay, substantial purport. Mamai vangsho jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatanaha manakshastan indriyani pakatistani karshati. So now we're back to this material world he's describing. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the 6 senses, which include the mind. Purport. In this verse, the identity of the living entity is clearly given. The living entity is the fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, eternally. It is not that he assumes individuality in his conditional life, and in his liberated state becomes one with the Supreme Lord. He is eternally fragmented. It is clearly said, Sanatana means eternal. According to the Vedic version, the Supreme Lord manifests and expands himself in innumerable expansions, of which the primary expansions are called Vishnu Tattva, and the secondary expansions are called the living entities. In other words, the Vishnu Tattva is the personal expansion, and the living entities are the separated expansions. By his personal expansion, he is manifested in various forms like Lord Ram, Nrsingadev, Vishnu Murti, and all the predominating deities in the Vaikuntha planets. The separated expansions, the living entities, are eternally servitors. The personal expansions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the individual identities of the Godhead, are always present. Similarly, the separated expansions of living entities have their identities. As fragmental parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, the living entities also have fragmental portions of his qualities, of which independence is one. Every living entity, as an individual soul, has his personal individuality and a minute form of independence. By misuse of that independence, one becomes a conditioned soul, and by proper use of independence, he is always liberated. In either case, he is qualitatively eternal, as the Supreme Lord is. In his liberated state, he is freed from this material condition, and he is under the engagement of transcendental service unto the Lord. In his conditioned life, he is dominated by the material modes of nature, and he forgets the transcendental loving service of the Lord. As a result, he has to struggle very hard to maintain his existence in the material world. The living entities, not only human beings and the cats and dogs, but even the greater controllers of the material world, Brahma, Lord Shiva, and even Vishnu, are all parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord. They are all eternal, not temporary manifestations. The word karshati, struggling or grappling hard, is very significant. The conditioned soul is bound up as though shackled by iron chains. He is bound up by the false ego, and the mind is the chief agent which is driving him in this material existence. When the mind is in the mode of goodness, his activities are good. When the mind is in the mode of passion, his activities are troublesome. And when the mind is in the mode of ignorance, he travels in the lower species of life. It is clear, however, in this verse, that the conditioned soul is covered by the material body, with the mind and senses, and when he is liberated, this material covering perishes, but his spiritual body manifests itself in its individual capacity. The following information is there in the Madhyanandinayana Shruti. Sabha esha brahmanishta idam shariram martyam atisridya brahmabhisampadya brahmana pashyati brahmana shinoti brahmana vedam sarvam anubhavati. It is stated here that when a living entity gives up this material embodiment and enters into the spiritual world, he revives his spiritual body, and in his spiritual body he can see the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face. He can hear and speak to him face to face, and he can understand the Supreme Personality as he is. From the Smriti also it is understood, Vasanti yatra purusha sarve vaikuntamurtayaha. In the spiritual planets, everyone lives in bodies featured like the Supreme Personality of Godheads. As far as bodily construction is concerned, there's no difference between the part and parcel living entities and the expansions of Vishnumurti. In other words, at liberation, the living entity gets a spiritual body by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The words Mamai Vangshaha, fragmental parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord, are also very significant. The fragmental portion of the Supreme Lord is not like some material broken part. We have already understood in the second chapter that the spirit cannot be cut into pieces. This fragment is not materially conceived. It is not like matter, which can be cut into pieces and joined together again. That conception is not applicable here, because the Sanskrit word sanatan, eternal, is used. The fragmental portion is eternal. It is also stated in the beginning of the second chapter that in each and every individual body, the fragmental portion of the Supreme Lord is present. Dehi nosmin yata dehi. The fragmental portion, when liberated from the bodily entanglement, revives its original spiritual body in the spiritual sky in a spiritual planet and enjoys association with the Supreme Lord. It is, however, understood here that the living entity, being the fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, is qualitatively one with the Lord, just as the parts and parcels of gold are also gold. So that's quite a substantial purport. We won't have time to really give it justice. Maybe I think we'll begin with this verse on Monday. But this is a very favorite verse of Prabhupada because it reiterates this idea that's been spoken of earlier in the book, that all of us, we are the jivas. He spoke about a spiritual world, now he's speaking about jivaloke. Jivaloke means this material world where we live as individual souls. We are eternally his anksha. This word anksha is very significant. You think of a drop of water in the ocean, or a sun ray versus the sun. The sun represents the unlimited source of heat and light, virtually speaking. And the sun ray has a little bit of that heat and light in it. And you can put them all together and it can get pretty hot, but not nearly as hot as the sun. So similarly, the ocean water, this Pacific Ocean, is huge. And you take a drop out of it and you analyze it, and it has the same chemicals as the ocean, but in minute quantity. Similarly, we have God's qualities in minute quantity. And one of those qualities, very important, is independence. Without independence, there's no question of love. Love has to be freely given. Otherwise, it's something else. It's not love. So Krishna that relationship is there with Krishna. And he expands himself eternally as the unlimited living entity, just like us. And in the spiritual world, there are countless living entities. And they're all in their constitutional position. This word mukti, if you study the Vedas and you study the Vedic literature, it comes up again and again. Mukti means liberation. Liberation from the bonds of birth and death, old age and disease. Highly coveted, obviously. But what is real mukti? There's a class of philosophers who think that mukti means if you have a body, then you're going to have attachments, you're going to have birth and death. So we want to get to that state where there's no body, there's no form, there's no activities, there's no thought. We're simply existing in our pure spiritual state of pure consciousness without content, basically, except I know that I exist. And there's a place like that in the brahma-jyoti. There's no varieties there. It's just pure light, and it's all composed of countless of these anksha, pure spirit, effulgence. And that's why it's so bright. But that's not our home. How can we be satisfied with that? Yes, you're free of all pain, but is that real life? You know? No, you want to have interactions. You want to do things. You want to interrelate with other people. You know? Right? That's who we are. So, therefore, the anksha means that we have Krishna's qualities in a minute degree, and part of Krishna's qualities are all these activities and so forth. So there's a little verse, or half a verse, that defines mukti according to the Bhagavad philosophy, the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is our ultimate source of knowledge. So it says that muktir hitbanyata rupam swarupena vivastati. Notice that word rupa appears twice in the verse. So mukti is, hitva means giving up on other rupas, other forms, which we're in now. And even in this one lifetime we have so many forms, isn't it? I remember when I was like 5 years old, 10 years old, 15, 20, 25, 30. Each of those I had different form, right? They may change gradually, you don't notice so much, but after a while, well, was that me? Where did that wrinkle come from, you know? Whoa, I got white hair. Different form, different form. And ultimately, this form finished entirely. But then you get another form, material form. So we have a swarup. We have an original form that doesn't change. So this verse says, mukti hitva anyata rupam, giving up all these other forms. We had millions of them. Different species, plants, insects, all kinds of things. As long as there's consciousness, that means there's a soul in there. So that, where did that get us? You know, nowhere. Just back again to, you know, birth and death. So giving up all those forms and being situated in our swarup, our original spiritual form. Prabhupada talks about that here. Each of us has a personal, individual, unique relationship with God that we've forgotten and is covered. Reawakening ourselves to it by the process of bhakti yoga is what this movement is all about. And when we succeed, we don't come back. We don't come back to a material form. We regain our original, we uncover it, regain, are situated in our spiritual form. In Goloka Vrndavana, in the spiritual world, Krishna mentioned at the beginning. So that's what, you know, this chapter is very concise, but there's all of this very important information here. And we'll continue, and then he describes the super soul, and very important information is coming up in this chapter of the Supreme Person. So we have time for one little poem. Lord Rishabdev, tomorrow, if you're interested, you can tune in, or if you miss it, tune in on YouTube. We'll be beginning the teachings of Lord Rishabdev in chapter 5 of the 5th canto. Very important. So he begins with this verse, Nayam deho dehabhajang galoke. So I put the essence of it into a little poem. Don't waste this precious human life, dear friend, by working hard for hoggish happiness. Through bhakti yoga, worldly life transcend, and learn to taste divine love's endless bliss. This is what Rishabdev, the essence of his teachings is, and in the first verse especially. Now, he uses the word tapasya. This is part of bhakti. In other words, we have to become convinced that we can't be happy here just pursuing our material desires, you know, and we have to turn towards spiritual. So that takes a little tapasya, means austerity, you know, getting up early in the morning, chanting Hare Krishna, you know. It's nothing compared with Ashtanga yoga. You know, go out to the Himalayas and live completely alone, live on whatever food you can find in the forest, and don't talk to anybody, and meditate like this, you know. Not for us, and it's not necessary. So, now we can adjourn and have a beautiful kirtan and see Radha Giridhari in their wonderful night outfit. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Hari Bol.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hari Bol, Dhanabhai.